Good morning. Welcome to our session entitled The Menthol Buffer Zone, Protecting Our Kids from Candy-Flavored Tobacco Products. I'm excited to hear from our speakers today, and our three speakers today are Mrs. Carol Magruder, Dr. Valerie Yerger, and our speaker from this morning, Dr. Philip Gardner. And they have decided to briefly introduce themselves so that they will have more time to present. So therefore, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Magruder and Dr. Gardner. Oh, before I do that, let me give you some housekeeping rules. Please cut your cell phones off or put them on vibrate, and we will send you a copy by email, the evaluation form. So please, when you receive that email, complete it for us. Thank you.
So good morning, folks. Thank you for having me again. I'm Dr. Philip Gardner. I work at the University of California Office of the President, Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program. I oversee our policy and regulatory sciences, and I oversee our neuroscience and nicotine-dependent portfolio. I am also the co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council California, but we also work nationally. My other co-chair, Carol Magruder, and one of our leading stars, Valerie Yerger, are going to present this morning. What I'm going to do is a little background. I did some of this in the opening plenary on menthol, but this is just to kind of set the stage. I'm going to talk about from whence the menthol discussion arises. A lot of this stuff, some of you know, some of you don't. Some of it is stuff published by Dr. Yerger. She's going to then follow me after I do the background to talk about the FDA, essentially where we are in this fight, and it's been quite a fight, and she goes over the last 5 years. It'll take every moment of the 20 minutes you have. And then Carol's going to wind us up actually talking about what we can do about it and what we've done about it in the past. And I realize I probably should put my glasses on. Okay. So.
Look, we have no money.
I'm telling you. So at the broadest level of abstraction, what we're dealing with is menthol. It's a candy flavor additive. It has unique reinforcing properties. It makes smoking much more palatable. It makes it easier to go down. It helps, what I say, it helps the poison to go down easier. And what we're calling on the FDA to do, and what we hope you all will do coming out of this, is broaden the definition of harm. As that harm, it increases initiation, greater potential for addiction. It's harder to quit, it's greater to relapse, and as I showed and will show again, it's a vehicle for predatory marketing to the most vulnerable sectors of our society. It's menthol in a nutshell. Menthol 101, one slide. Menthol is in many things that we use. This is from an article that the tobacco industry put out in 1993. Oral care, candy, chewing gums, mouthwash, toothpaste, lozenges, foot sprays, cigarettes. It's ubiquitous in our culture. We use it all the time. That's why we don't think about it a lot. We think it's something normal, quote unquote, that we have in products. This is the most surprising part of it, is that all tobacco products have menthol in them. Not some tobacco products, not just menthol cigarettes, all cigarettes do. The menthol cigarettes, the weak and the strong of them, have greater proportions of menthol in them. You can taste it, sometimes called the characterizing flavor of the menthol. But regular Marlboros have menthol in them, pipe tobacco, chewing tobacco, roll your own tobacco. All tobacco has menthol in it because of its unique properties. And so what are those unique properties? I'm going to go through this in a little bit. Menthol is the chief constituent of peppermint oil that's extracted from the peppermint. We get most of the menthol that we put in our cigarettes from Brazil. It's imported by Philip Morris. Altria, excuse me, representatives in the audience. It has a mini taste, fresh odor. This cooling sensation, it activates taste buds on your tongue. We funded a study in California to look at this phenomena of activation of taste buds. Come to find out that the taste buds that are activated by menthol are the same taste buds that are activated by capsaicin. Capsaicin is the active ingredient in hot sauce. We all like hot sauce. It's a little irritant, it's a little something like that. Menthol does the same thing. It's an irritant, but we like that irritability that it creates. They do the same thing. We say it mimics bronchial dilation. This is very important. When you inhale menthol, it sends a signal to the brain to pull more because you think the bronchi is opening up. Studies show that the bronchial tubes don't get any larger. But the brain says, oh, you inhale more, so you inhale deeper. Mask, of course, the harshness of taste. Independent sensory activation of neurotransmitters. When you smoke a cigarette, it goes into the lungs, it sends a message to the brain to release dopamine into your system, and it releases a number of other neurotransmitters, or activates a number of neurotransmitters. Some studies show that menthol has a unique set of neurotransmitters that it activates on its own. Not to put too sharp a point on this, some people think that when you try to quit smoking cigarettes, and if you're a menthol smoker, that you have to quit not only the nicotine, but you have to quit the menthol. That's why it's so hard to get off the thing in the first place. Increases salivary flow and transbuccal drug absorption. These are big words for this. If you chew tobacco, it crosses your gum, the transbuccal, it crosses your gum much more efficiently than nicotine does if it has menthol in it. Studies show that it goes across the gum much more efficiently if it has menthol in it than if it doesn't have menthol in it. That's why they put menthol in all these products. Some of the times it characterizes it. And the thing that is most concerning about this, given the great number of lung cancer cases in African Americans, is cell permeability. Cell permeability is when you inhale the smoke into your lungs, we find that smoke that has menthol in it allows the nicotine to penetrate cells much more easier than smoke that doesn't have menthol in it. This is why they put menthol in at all. It activates neurotransmitters, it gets into your system more easily, and it goes down into your lungs much more efficiently. Short history of menthol. First cigarettes created in 1926. Spud cigarettes continued until 1963. Penguin took it over between 31 and 33, but it was in 1933 to the present that we actually have Cools. Cool cigarettes come out in 1973. There's a little penguin, a little hat, you got a little cigarette. It was the leader in menthol sales between 1972 and 1981. Salem comes about in 1956. What was so important about 1956? This was the filtered menthol cigarette that comes out. And it became the leader from 56 to 71 until Cools overthrew it in 72. It then became the leader again in the 80s, but Newport had something for them because by 91, Newport took it over, and Newport is the leader today in menthol sales in our communities and all other communities around. This is from an article I did 10 years ago. The slide I showed again this morning, this is the background of what we're confronted with. The tripling between 53 to 68, the tripling between 68 to 76, and the doubling between 76 to 1990, or actually the mid-2000s. Menthol use is pushed down the throats, for lack of a better term, of tobacco smokers, and particularly African-American tobacco smokers. What occasioned this? I argued then, and will argue now, Valerie argued in her article, that African-American smokers like this unique social phenomenon was principally occasioned by the masterful manipulation of the segregated, burgeoning black urban consumer market of the 1960s. They took our marketing, they had special products for us, there were special hair creams for us, there was special alcohol for us, and there were special smokes for us. Different smokes for different folks. Okay? And that's how they did it. So this is part of how they did it. Brown and Williamson's figured out that African Americans looked at disproportionately more TV than other groups, spent 91% of their advertising budget on television ads aimed at promoting tobacco, promoting menthol cigarettes. They began to use male actors that looked like African Americans, tripled cigarette advertising in ebony. Menthol's got a brand new mag. They took the idiom, of course James Brown's song, they turned that into theirs. I'll show you a picture of that. Cool jazz was taking place. John Coltrane, Miles Davis, cool jazz. Cools were cool. Okay. And philanthropy, of course, a great article done by Dr. Yerger on smoking with the enemy. Unfortunately, the tobacco industry has given money to most, if not all, the organizations operating in our community to try and blunt their fight back against us. Unfortunately, they've been very successful in this. This is an ad for Salem's in '58. New look in smoking. Salem refreshes your taste. Here's your classic American color. Here is an ad for Salem's for Cools in 1960, 61, 62. This is Elston Howard, catcher, New York Yankees, beginning to use the black features. But then they bring it all the way up. This is 1970. My brother's got the dashiki on, he's got an afro, you know, he's got a Newport, he's got the beads, a whole new bag of menthol smoking. Okay. Who do you think they're aiming this ad at? Similarly, so throughout the 70s, there became a fight. Newport joined into it. You know, black folks like to play basketball. Aimed it at that, aimed it at sports. Cools knew that black folks like to play basketball. Aimed it at that, aimed it at sports. These slides are available to you. You can either write me or go directly to Stanford. There's a great project. He's collected all these slides on African Americans and tobacco. I want to encourage you to use it in your own presentations and your own work. Newport again, now we're into the 80s and 90s. Newport Pleasure, fire it up. Remember this slogan used to say, Newport alive with pleasure. And then after marketing tests came to find out, people realized that Newports kill you. They dropped alive. Now it's just Newport Pleasure. Okay. They're very slick. Here's an article done by Dr. Yerger, and I'm going to talk a little bit about racialized geography, corporate activity, and health disparities, tobacco industry targeting of inner cities. The stuff that they did in the 60s, they reflected back on what Cool had done, and they said, we're going to have a fight about this. And what took place in the 1980s was a fight between the major tobacco industries, the major tobacco companies in the black community for their market. And I did put the slide in here, and I should have put the slide in here. Cool was out there first. Salem was out there first. Cool took over. Salem came back. And then Newport came back. There was a jostle. There was a fight until somebody shook it out and somebody won. And Newport won this fight. Major, guys did it this way. We put them all up here. They competed against each other. They saw what Cool had done and had the fights in the 80s. They were exploited inner city by the tobacco industry. Lorillard's inner city sales program closed the gap between sales of Newport and Cool. People are targeting Cool. Philip Morris Inner City Task Force, beef up Benson and Hedges, menthol in inner cities. I used to smoke Benson and Hedges at one point. RGR Black Initiative, increase Salem sales of cigarettes among black smokers. Everybody's on, this was all on their agenda. All of this is taken from the tobacco industry documents too. These are not just my stuff. These are some of the documents. So what's it say? A competition is centering their marketing effects in the low-income black communities. What's the date on this?
Yeah, that's a good point. Look at the date.
1987. The fight's on. Cool did their thing. They got out there. People said, we're not going to let this take. You can't have this by yourself. Developed to specifically target minorities with high school education or less. Remember this other slide I did this morning. Tough inner city neighborhoods. Focus territories. Focus communities. These guys are very straightforward. Here's another confidential thing. Who is this aimed at? Males and females, young adults, high school education or less, predominantly black and Hispanic communities. Focus communities. They know what they were doing, who they're aiming at. I guess the van program was the thing I thought was most interesting, and I'll show you a picture of the van. Valerie has a couple of pictures of the vans, but actually had vans travel around to the different parts of the community, stop, get out, distribute cigarettes free, have music playing. How do you fight back about this? If cool's ahead, then you take it right to the place. Retailers' incentive, distribution of free cigarettes, street sampling. This is terrible. Vans allowed sample distributors to be protected from unruly crowds while handing out free cigarettes in dangerous territory. They knew where they were. They knew what they were doing. Unique attention-getting sample device found to be very effective for reaching target marketing their own environment. Innovative marketing technology used to promote menthol cigarettes. There's a Salem van. Offers protection too. I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay. Financial incentives. They have, not to go into this too much deal, there's a special contract that a retailer takes up with the tobacco industry. There's certain incentives that are in there. There are different incentives for different communities. There's more amount of money paid to poor communities, retailers, the point we were talking about earlier. Scaled down displays that fit small crowded stores. This is true. It depends on the store. As I showed you the slide from Dorchester, largest ads were in the poorest communities. Use of black models and marketing materials resemble the Harvard black down to earth and not the Harvard Use of suction cups to hang signage from bulletproof shields. Terrible, terrible. I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures here. This one we've seen. This is about 2004. My favorite. This is the Cool Mix campaign. Each one of these is a cigarette pack. Okay. You think they're marketing to us? Unfortunately, very successful. Schools try to make a comeback at this point. Once Newport took this over in 1991, they haven't given it up. But by the late 90s and early 2000s, Cool made a fight back around this. The thing I wanted to, I showed this slide earlier, and I think it's really my last slide. I'm not sure why I have all these other slides on there. And I'll look and I'll see. These gray bars are middle school and the darker bars are high school, and that menthol use goes down in each community from middle to high school, except in the African American community. You could write your whole dissertation on that. Why that happened, how that happened. And a lot of the information I presented and that Valerie and Carol are going to present is going to explain why it's happened. I mentioned also the focus groups, the focus communities, the focus and the non-focus communities. This is part of the target marketing. All of this is the background that is leading up to where we are today in the fight around menthol. Let me just close with saying that some of us have been in this fight since got into the fight in the 90s. We thought we had gotten close to a victory in 2009 when Barack Obama signed the Family Smoking Prevention Act. But of course, there was one major exception. Of all the candy flavors that were banned, menthol was left out. With that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to let Valerie come up. And she's going to take it from there.
Good morning, everyone. Valerie Yerger, researcher, Community San Francisco. I've been looking at tobacco industry documents for quite a while. I was one of the first ones, researchers, to look at the documents in terms of the industry targeting African American communities. And after my project, we were able to show that what the industry did in the African American community, they were doing in other communities as well. So but we started folks looking at industry behavior and their targeting. So a couple of the slides here are very similar to what Dr. Gardner has presented, and I may not spend a lot of time on that. But what I want to do is to help present a case of why menthol needs to be a serious issue if we're going to be talking about preventing tobacco use among our kids. It's like, to us, it's a no-brainer, but yet we've been dealing with some of the same issues, getting the FDA to do the right thing for quite a while. So I wanted to give you guys.
You want me to advance your slides for me?
I don't know if it's easier for you to do that or for me to do it because of this. So obviously, I'm going to give you an overview.
There's a delay, just FYI.
Pardon me?
Yeah, when you push it, sometimes it takes a bit for the second thing to come up.
So if I stand here, am I blocking the view for folks?
Of course you are.
So I'm going to talk about the market, talk about the African American uptake, and how the industry documents show that the reason why they were targeting African Americans is because they're trendsetters. We have the properties of the menthol. I'll talk a little bit about that and how that contributed to the youth epidemic. Our federal efforts, there are a couple that I'll go through. Come on, you're moving on your own. Involving the FDA, and also in 2012, we had the Surgeon General report that focused on preventing tobacco use among our youth and young adults. And then I want to talk about some of our local efforts. Which included what happened within Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and I'll talk about why that was significant, and also set it up for Carol's talk on what happened in Chicago. So let's look at a little bit on marketing. Let me see if I can say something a little bit different than what Dr. Gardner has said. So this is our cool guide. You know, I just wanted to show a different, this is more contemporary. This is definitely a more recent ad, even after the efforts with the FDA, which we'll talk about in a minute, we're still seeing ads. Cool did acquire Brown and Williamson, or this is R.J. Reynolds, I'm sorry. R.J. Reynolds acquired Cool from Brown and Williamson. Brown and Williamson got out of the menthol market, and R.J. Reynolds is the main competitor with Lorelard's Newport. Since I'm going to be talking a little bit about the trendsetters, these are trendsetters here. We've got, you know, I don't know if Jay-Z is a billionaire. He's pretty close. Dr. Dre's now a billionaire as a merge that happened just last week. And we know Beyonce is making quite a bit of money herself, but these are folks that are setting the, influencing our young folks, and not just black folks, but young kids from other racial and ethnic groups as well. This is a 1989 R.J. Reynolds document. I was going through documents and found this document that talked not about trendsetters, but this was within a document on marketing. And I'll just read it quickly, and it says, trends are often started by low-income males. The daring, flamboyant aspect of young adult black smokers' personalities are evident in the many trends they start. These trends often spread to the general population. It speaks to the unrecognized power and influence this subgroup wields on society. So we saw earlier how the use of menthol marketing was really to target African Americans, and particularly the males. This is why. This is back in the 80s, and we saw how the use of menthol cigarettes in groups outside of the African American community was really low, right? But we started to see that the youth and other racial and ethnic groups are starting to increase, and this is a recent phenomenon. And this is because the industry has been working on this. We're talking, so my daughter was born in 80, so this is, you know, almost 30 years ago. You know, so they plan. We like things quickly. We want to have things right away, but the industry is very comfortable projecting way in the future. And so as we think in terms of how do we prevent tobacco use and to protect our kids, we also have to think long term as well. So, Mr. Trendsetter, I've actually been in his presence. He's a very spooky guy. So I wanted to talk about some of the properties of menthol. When the FDA was looking at the legislation, it was actually right after the FDA bill, and I'll talk a little bit about it, but they came to me at UC San Francisco, and they wanted me to look into the tobacco industry documents to help them understand what the industry knows about menthol. So pulled together a team at UCSF. We looked at a number of questions regarding menthol, and I wanted to just present some of them. This whole menthol makes smoking easier, this came out of a tobacco industry document in 1982. So the industry knows that menthol is much more than just a taste additive. You know, we think menthol, we think taste, you know, the taste buds are very important, and that does play a role, but menthol is so much more than just taste to the industry. And they recognize that menthol could help smoking be a much more pleasant experience, and that it minimized the negatives associated with smoking. We talk about the cooling effects all the time, and this is something that we know, but this is just to point out that the industry knew about these particular properties. Here's the first one is from 1979. It talks about the cooling effects of menthol, that it's like a drug. And in 1983, R.J. Reynolds knows that menthol helps to alleviate the irritating effects from nicotine. So this is something that the industry has definitely known about long before we even started talking about the cooling effects. One of the things that we haven't really talked about is how menthol actually interferes with people's ability to quit smoking. And I don't have the dates for these documents printed, but again, we're talking about the 80s and the 90s, and the industry recognizing that people associate menthol with medicine. So, you know, instead of quitting your regular cigarette when you have a sore throat or a cold or something, just switch over to menthol. It's healthy. It'll help you feel a little bit better. And also, they conducted focus groups with smokers. And smokers of menthol cigarettes felt that they were less offensive, that, you know, how the smell of tobacco can stay on you when you're smoking. Well, if it's menthol, it smells a little bit better. So there's no incentive to quit smoking at the same level. This is, it looks like a very complicated slide, and it's a very important one, so I want to walk you through it. This was taken from research that Philip Morris had conducted back in 1991. And what they did is they took test cigarettes that contained various levels of nicotine, and they compared them with adding various levels of menthol. So the horizontal line, and I think I dropped something, so I don't have a pointer anymore. But the horizontal line represents the amount of menthol delivery. So as it moves to the right, it increases in terms of menthol delivery. The vertical line is the impact score, and that impact score helps to translate how attractive or how satisfying the experience of smoking would be. And so there's 3 different types of test cigarettes: cigarettes that have absolutely no nicotine, intermediate amount of nicotine in the middle, and then compare it with the high nicotine. And you can see that those cigarettes that have high levels of nicotine actually have a very high impact score. But I want to show you something here. This is a pretty obvious expectation. This is pretty intuitive. Cigarettes that have high nicotine levels have a high impact score. But this is what's interesting. These are cigarettes that have absolutely no nicotine. And look at what happens with the impact score as you increase the level of menthol. Now this is something that the industry has known about for decades, and they know how important menthol is. So menthol is much more than a flavor. You need menthol for people to have that high impact. And kids who are just starting, they don't really understand impact or whatever. They're just having an experience. So the impact is that throat grab, the one that lets you, helps you to really like a product and plays a really big role in getting you addicted to a product. The other thing that's very interesting about menthol is that it stimulates the trigeminal nerve, and the trigeminal nerve is one of our cranial nerves, and it innervates the entire head. So apparently that's really important because nicotine also stimulates this nerve. And it was very much something that the industry was very interested in. And again, it had a lot to do with the smoker liking the experience of smoking of cigarettes, and that it was very essential to eliciting a liking response. A Philip Morris scientist back in 1990 said that menthol was found to be a partial replacement for nicotine, primarily because of how menthol stimulates this particular nerve. We talked a little bit already about how menthol is in virtually all tobacco products. Even at very low or subliminal levels, menthol is very effective at eliciting these responses. And I wanted to include a quote that William True, who was at the time the Senior Vice President of Research and Development at Lorillard, in his testimony to the FDA's Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee back in July 2010, where he said menthol at very low levels is sometimes used in non-menthol brands. I think he was nervous. We were there.
We were there.
Yeah, he was nervous. He said some things he probably wish he hadn't said. Okay, so here, let's talk about the youth epidemic very quickly, and then I want to get into the FDA. 3.6 million youth are cigarette smokers. We know that every day 3,800 kids under the age of 18 are smoking their first cigarette. Virtually no one starts smoking after the age of 25. And currently 1.7 million adolescents also use some other non-cigarette tobacco products, and most of these are flavored as well. We've seen this slide. This is the 3rd time already. But what I want to point out is just because I want to bring back the point of how African American youth have been trendsetters. What you don't see on this slide is how, if you look at the Hispanic youth and the Asian youth and the white youth, and you look at their use of menthol, prior years those levels were much lower. So it's increasing over time. And again, we can see who's smoking menthol. Our kids 12 to 17 years old. And that level is actually increasing over time. So let's talk about the federal efforts, starting with our Federal Drug Administration. Let me just go ahead and pull this up. So legislation that was signed into law by President Obama was signed June 22nd, 2009, gave the FDA the authority to regulate tobacco products. And it allowed the FDA to prohibit cigarettes of all flavorings, but they chose not to. They only chose certain flavors, almost all of them, except for menthol. And if you look at all the other flavored tobacco products that are or let's say cigarettes, flavored cigarettes that are non-menthol, represents like a fraction of 1% use among our youth. But the Family Smoking Prohibition and Tobacco Control Act, which I'll just call the Act from this point on, also required the establishment of this Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee. So this legislation was years in the making. About a year before it got signed, one of my colleagues came to me with the legislation. It was like this. She put it on my desk and she said, "Have you read through this?" I'm like, not yet. I haven't gotten to that piece yet. And she said, "Well, go." And she turned it to where it talked about the exclusion of menthol. And nobody had had this discussion. We didn't really know. So I picked up the phone, I called a few people, I said, we're in trouble. And we ended up having a huge public outcry, and it had to be very organized, and it had to be very systematic in terms of being able to be effective. We got a quote from Dr. Joseph Califano, who's one of our former Secretary of Health. And he said, "You know, we do everything we can to protect our children in America, especially our white children. It's time to do the same for all children. Clearly, this bill is putting black children in the back of the bus." And so, actually, as a result of letter writing and just hearing from organizations such as the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, we were just starting up. We had national representatives, like the National African American Tobacco Prevention Network was very instrumental. It led to a provision being added on to the legislation and this provision is right here, where it recommends that the TPSAC produce a report and recommendations on the impact of the use of menthol in cigarettes on the public health, including such use among African Americans, Hispanics, and other racial and ethnic minorities. It was our advocacy that got that in there. And we had a champion, U.S. Congresswoman Donna Christensen. She took the lead in writing the amendment. So by the time that President Obama signed the bill, it had this amendment, and it basically made menthol the first thing that the Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee had to address, and they had to produce a report on their findings. I do want to point out, I've been showing this picture for years, and we'll see the mayor, our current mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, is sitting right here, so give a shout out to him. We'll talk about him later. So TPSAC called in a number of researchers. Dr. Gardner testified, Carol testified. I took my entire findings from our team at UC San Francisco, and one of my colleagues and I presented all of our research findings. And there were quite a bit of published articles that were coming out because people were like hurrying up to get things published, because you can't really present something unless it's evidence, and it's not evidence unless it's published. So there was a lot of work, and Dr. Gardner was also a co-editor of a supplement. So there were supplements coming out in journals to really help TPSAC do this. So TPSAC came up with their report. And these are their major findings: that menthol cannot be considered merely a flavoring additive, that it increases the likelihood of nicotine addiction, especially in adolescents and young adults who are experimenting, and that the removal of menthol cigarettes from the marketplace would benefit public health in the United States. This came out in 2011. Yet, the FDA has yet to do anything about it. The FDA, based on the findings from the TPSAC report, based on other publications that were coming out, they said that they needed to do their own internal investigation. They presented a report, and I don't remember the date of that, 2012, but it sat in the White House for 2 years. And it was just released last year, and their findings were very similar to what the TIPSAC report. I mean, the evidence is there. What else are you going to say? So in 2012, the Surgeon General report came out. Here. And it focused on preventing tobacco use among youth and young adults. And their findings, again, were very, very similar to what TIPSAC was. But what's very interesting is, has anybody seen the Surgeon General report? Typically, they're like 900 pages long. So if you're a researcher, you still don't have that kind of time. And if you're doing community advocacy work, you rely on the executive summary. And even that can be too much for certain groups to handle. See, things have to be set up and disseminated in such a way that people can use it. Otherwise, it just goes on the shelf and stays there. But in that 22-page executive summary, there's not a single word about menthol.
Is that a political pressure situation, you think?
Yeah, we can talk about that. I think when we have our Q&A, that'd be a good time to bring it up. So let's talk about efforts closer to home. So one of the things that I had to understand when I was looking at the tobacco industry documents, that first major paper that came out of our team on smoking with the enemy, I actually was going through documents, and unknown to me, one of my colleagues was watching me cry. And I was sitting there, I was so emotional because I was seeing groups that I was a member of, I was seeing groups that my family loved and trusted. Carol and I have had interactions with people that I grew up thinking they were my heroes and getting evil looks and stuff coming out of their mouth when we would talk to them about tobacco. So it was very emotional, like I don't understand this. Like we all want the same thing for our community, so something else obviously is going on. But I know how important it is to get this information into the hands of groups, and that we don't come from the outside of those groups and say, look, this is what you need to do. You need to get your national leaders to take a look at their relationship with the tobacco industry. That has to come from within. So I started looking at, well, what am I associated with? So I was thinking about my sorority. I'm a Delta. I don't know other Deltas. I know there's some sorors in here. So as the chair of our Healthy Lifestyle Committee, I'm a member. So I'm clear. I need to be clear with you guys. I'm not here representing my sorority. I am a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. And as a member of that sorority, I introduced a resolution. Because we were getting really active outside, you know, Carol and there really aren't that many of us who are doing this work. The perception is that there's a lot of us, and that's important. And we want our perception to really become truer. But I introduced a resolution before our 51st convention. And I did this through my chapter, Berkeley Bay Area Alumni Chapter. And our chapter loved it, but none of us thought it was going to be accepted at the national level. But guess what? It got approved at the national level. Last year in July, we had a convention in Washington, D.C., 40,000 of us strong. I guess I was going to say something, or I knew I was going to say something. Oh, this is what I was going to say. In this act, there are provisions in there to support what we do locally. So I want to make that really clear. And if we remember that, you know, what the FDA is really important in terms of maybe an umbrella, but tobacco control has always been done at the local level. And there are provisions to support what we do. And this is the other reason why it's important to do the local level. Because the FDA focuses on cigarettes, but we know, especially among our youth of color, that their use of other products is increasing. So what we do at the local level can also address these other flavored products. And then this is just to identify the sorority that I'm in and how strong we are in our resolution, which was asking the FDA to prohibit the use of menthol as a characterizing flavor in cigarettes. This was the first time that a large African-American organization has taken a stand on tobacco. And whereas I can't get up and speak for the sorority because I'm not a national president nor a past president, if you take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth person from the left is one of our past national presidents. Sora Dalmati Daly, who appeared, and you see Carol right here. This is at a press conference held in March. There's still a lot of frustrations because the FDA has not stepped up. Like the FDA still is dragging their tail and they have not made a decision about menthol. So we have Carol, and standing next to Carol are doctors Louis Sullivan and Dr. Joseph Califano. They have been very active in trying to get the United States to recognize that we have a huge problem and trying to put pressure on the FDA and our government and their former secretaries of health. And they are still making an attempt to bring attention to this issue and trying to get the FDA to ban menthol. And Sora Dalmati Daly, Dr. Daly, showed up representing our organization, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, and basically saying we have a resolution and we support the ban on menthol. And there's research that shows that African Americans, the majority of African Americans who smoke, support a ban on menthol. And so as a result of having our resolution, there's discussions going on with other Black Greek organizations. Our organization is 240,000 women strong. That's one of 9 Black Greek organizations. The other Greek organizations are actually very large as well. That's a lot of leverage. A lot of leverage. And what we're finding out, I just want to see a hands of Black Greeks in the room. Look at this. We're all doing tobacco control. And we need to know who we are. And it's not just Black Greek organizations. We're affiliated with other types of organizations. The point of this is that from within, we can get a lot of work done. And then you grab a hold of those of us who've already been doing it so that we're not working in silos. We can work together. And I think this is, and I'm going to leave it here because this is another local effort. I actually was contacted by Chicago back in July, right around the same time that our resolution and our sorority have been approved. And they said, you know, the FDA is not doing anything. It's time for us to do something. I said, I know the right people to bring to you. And I brought Carol Magruder to them and Dr. Gardner, and the 3 of us actually went there and did some work, and Carol's going to talk about it.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Carol Magruder, and I'm co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council out of California. We're California-based, but we work all over the country, as we've been talking about. And so we were formed in 2008, and basically we circled the wagons in California, which has been a model state. Let me say a little bit about myself. I've been doing tobacco control since the 90s, the early 90s. I'm a seasoned veteran and have done a little bit of everything from community advocacy, public policy, research, guidance and sensation, and social justice. So I've done a little bit of everything on these 20 years that we've been around. And with the downturn of the economy and the cutting of funding, we circled the wagons and formed this council. And we have one of our members, Kimberly Banksley, so there's 4 of us here today from California from our council, to really,
Is Katrina here? Oh, okay, sorry.
She's to another
Okay,
session.
sorry.
to demand that our state serve our community, to deal with our own internal corruption and co-optation with the tobacco industry in terms of our community-based organizations and political leaders. And we have really been doing great work. And so this is our group, and I'm just proud to work with them and to the things that we've done. So I'm going to advance all these. So we have, this was an abstract that we presented in Singapore at the World Conference on Tobacco or Health. We were, menthol is a social justice issue, and we felt that we had been left out of the act that President Obama signed in terms of menthol and the other flavored tobacco products. So as previously has been discussed, our African American populations were perniciously targeted by all of the major tobacco companies. The urban programs that Dr. Phil and Valerie have described really co-opted our leadership groups, had heavy media campaigns, and so as a result of that, over 80% of African Americans smoke mentholated cigarettes, and over 90% of our youth initiate. So addiction, we have so many different presentations, but addiction is about science and opportunity. It's not about personal weakness. And so the more that entities who make war on us have access to our community, the more addicted we are. Hence, we have huge problems with smoking, alcoholism, crack, and other drugs as well. And that's because there are entities that come in and prey upon us. And of course, there's a social component to that, but addiction is about science and opportunity. So for us, menthol is a human rights issue and a social justice issue, and that's how we approach it when we're doing the work that we do. So we're part of a national movement to ban menthol, Save Lives, Ban Menthol, and it's really an ad hoc group, and that's how we, the initial contact with Chicago, we meet as needed, and we strategize about what we're doing about menthol to bring it to the public's attention and to get it banned. So banning is up here, and there are other things that we can do along the way. So the buffer zone is right here, and that's what we're trying to get out there, this buffer zone. So as Dr. Val mentioned, Beta Sigma Theta, they passed a resolution which is huge. We had unsuccessfully tried to get a resolution passed at the national level of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. At the time, I was president of the Berkeley, California branch. And we were blocked. We didn't even get out of the resolutions committee, so it never made it to the floor. But everything is a progression, and you have your knockdowns, and you get back up and you approach it, and you get back out there. So when the Deltas pass their resolution, it's really, it's huge, and it's something that people aren't really aware of, but it's growing, and it's going to have a huge impact on our community. Brazil has banned menthol. They were the first ones, and they banned all additives, I think except for sugar. The European Union has banned it, and then Dr. McGurger already talked about the Citizens Commission to Protect the Truth, of which we are part of that. So this is the Delta. She had her slide in there, so I'm going to move on past that. Hawaii had introduced some legislation that died in committee just in April of 24, and this was actually for the whole state. So everything is a progression, and we just need that groundswell. Tobacco control has always been a grassroots issue, and so we need the groundswell so that our federal government will do the right thing. The FDA will do the right thing. This is back to the Citizens Commissions to Protect the Truth. So this is that press conference. So this commission is comprised of all of the former U.S. Secretaries of Health, all of the Surgeon Generals, the directors of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So they urge the tobacco industry to stop selling menthol, and they also urge the FDA to ban menthol. And that's recent. That was just March of this year. And this is their report that they issued, which is a time to ban menthol. And there's the link that will get you the report. So when we're dealing with our communities, tobacco has to rise above a lot of issues to get our attention. Economic development, racism, oppression, other health concerns, all of the chronic diseases, we're right at the top of the list for everything. You hear all HIV, AIDS, breast cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and then we also are dealing with poverty, the social determinants of health, and violence. And violence is something that, when I talk in our communities, it's something that's in your face, it's up front. And so it's something that gets our attention, but there are a lot more people who are killed by tobacco than violence. And so nicotine addiction is a social justice issue. Whenever we have tobacco industry sanctions, they're always measured and they preserve the status quo, no matter how big it seems. And I'm happy to see that some master settlement funds are actually being used for tobacco prevention and control work and research. I want to applaud the state of Arkansas, because most of that money, the billions and billions of dollars that were reimbursed back to the states, very little of it went to tobacco control. People, states built bridges and did all kinds of things, but it was very little was put back for the root cause that generated all of that income. So sanctions are not designed to stop the #1 preventable cause of death, because that's political suicide. The tobacco industry, we want them to be framed as a pro-crack or pro-meth force in our community, and they do a lot more damage than the illicit drugs that are legal. and that oftentimes African Americans and other marginalized communities, we are the bargaining chip in public policy. So we're the giveaway while they're protecting other communities. Smoking and tobacco is a problem of political will. It's not a health issue. So this is Chicago, we're getting to Chicago. And so this is the Commissioner Shuker, who is part of this whole initiative. So we want to always, we want to keep the social justice argument there and never concede, because we have the moral authority. And so we don't have any money when we do our disclosures, but we do have the moral authority. So Chicago leads the way. So we were so excited and enthused when we heard about what Chicago was doing, because Chicago is a city of broad shoulders. They're getting out front, take care of the litigation issues for cities and municipalities that are gun shy, and they're in the process. So if we follow them, we can simply just walk, get up under their shoulders, under their wings, and it'll make it a lot easier. So when Mayor Rahm Emanuel got into office, he made it a priority for tobacco control in Chicago. And I believe his father was a pediatrician, and so he had that leaning and had been involved along the way when he was in Congress and when he was President Obama's chief of staff. He's been involved in tobacco control throughout his career. And so one of the things that he wanted to do was ensure that our children don't start smoking in Chicago. So these are some of the things that we've already seen. I'm going to skip on ahead of this. So part of what Chicago did was they really did get out in the community. They had town hall meetings, listening sessions. They got a lot of people involved in that initial rollout of what this was going to look like in terms of creating this buffer zone and getting it implemented. And so these are some of the organizations. And I also want to give a shout out to NAPTN. We are an affiliate of NAPTN and have gotten a little pot of money that helps us to travel around the country and do what we do. So the National African American Tobacco Prevention Network was part of this initiative too. So this is some of the organizations that were involved in Chicago. So these are these flavored tobacco products. So the gist of the 500-foot buffer zone is that flavored tobacco products do not belong near our schools. They do not belong near our children. And so, as has already been documented, and I have some slides as well, anytime we have communities of color and African American communities, there's a lot more advertising, the products are cheaper, and it's part of what the tobacco industry tries to create, a sense of familiarity. That this is what you do when you get a certain age, because it's all around you, and you're seeing it before your eyes can focus. You're seeing all of these advertisements, and this is just what people do as they grow up. They smoke. So this is one of the inner city children who was one of the giveaways, one of those bargaining chips. She grew up in Boston public housing, and she was giving free Newports at the age of 9. She was dead at 54. She was addicted to cigarettes at age 13. She initially used to trade the cigarettes for candy in Boston, and then she started smoking. She was dead at 54, and her family was awarded a $152 million judgment. So this was the first case that we know of where an African American family was awarded anything out of all this death and destruction. And so the case finally settled. Last year, her son actually received $79 million from the makers of Newport. So this is huge, and this is something that people who are not in tobacco control don't know about. So when you think about, to get a settlement like that, what the evidence that was presented, that the value of a black woman's life in America could be worth $80 million is pretty incredible. So that's the pernicious predatory targeting. So we think that that couldn't happen anymore, but it does. So this is tobacco sampling 2.0, and Dr. Gardner has talked about a little bit. This is a study that was done out of Stanford University, and it just found that for every 10% increase of African American students, so those are children under the age of 18, for every 10% of the population that goes up, you have more menthol advertising, you have more promotions, and you have cheaper cigarettes. And that's that trade away. So in Chicago, when they implemented the 500-foot buffer, there were 351 stores that will not be allowed to sell any flavored tobacco products. So this is their map. And they explored, 500 feet, 750 feet, and 1,000. Because it's so dense, they had to go to 500 feet. But for a city like Little Rock or other places, then you want to get the maximum number of feet that you can if your city's is interested in implementing something like this. So this is part of the public education campaign that accompanied the rollout, burned by menthol cigarettes. And so just as the tobacco industry targets different communities, so must our public education. And people must see themselves in the advertising and in the public education. They must speak to them. So as part of all of what's been going on with Chicago, these are tobacco, the calls to the tobacco quit line. And so you'll see that it's a dramatic increase from 2012 to 2013. And more than 2/3 of the calls were from minority communities. And youth smoking in Chicago is down. And so when I see slides like this, I'm reminded that a lot of the data that's collected, it's not talking to our boys that are in juvenile facilities or who've dropped out of schools. So I would imagine it's not this good in our communities, but it is down. And I put this is Kendall Stagg, who was kind of our henchman. I put our link person for Chicago. I put this in here because when people get these slides, if they want to contact him, he's one of the kind of person, if you email him on a Sunday, he answers back in 5 seconds. He's always on, and he's very much wanting to get this out and to provide technical assistance to other people who are interested in the 500-foot buffer. So this buffer zone creates a 500-foot buffer around all Chicago schools, so schools, and that includes child care facilities and daycares, and it prohibits the sale of all flavored tobacco products. So those are the Swisher Sweets, the Black & Milds, the blunt wrappers that are really inundated in our neighborhood. So of course it includes menthol and includes all these other products. So it's really huge, and it really is urban policy. And so some of the first public policy that protects urban children and inner city children over suburban children. And so these are the little cigars that we're talking about. And so when we've been fighting and advocating about the FDA, this was just totally left out of the act that President Obama signed. So there's still menthol, there's still grape, there's still bubblegum flavors in the little cigars, and the only difference between the little cigars and the cigarette is the brown wrapper. And these are some of those products that are heavily sold in our communities. So healthy communities facilitate the individual's ability to make healthy choices, and part of what this 500-foot buffer zone does is it's changing the community norm, and it's making it easier to make a healthy decision than to make an unhealthy decision. In California, we have the California Endowment, and they have a huge campaign that health happens here, and it's just talking about, they target different zip codes and how in the same area, one zip code has a 12-year differential in the life expectancy. And so it's about where you live and what's going on in your community as much as it is about anything else in terms of the social determinants of health field. So with the buffer zone, it denormalizes the inundation of deadly tobacco products, and it tells our children that they are worth public policy that protects them. And it's relevant to inner city African American and Latino communities. When we were in Chicago and testified, Chicago has 51 aldermen, so it's like, imagine a city council with 51 people on it. And so when we got up to speak, and we talked about, at that time, Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis were the views. And so those are the things that we're concerned about. And Chicago has a huge problem with homicides, and they're dealing with it all the time. But to make it relevant that for every black boy who's murdered, there's 6 or 7 adults, some parents and grandparents who are dying at home. And those are the people who stabilize our families. Those are the people, we want our children to live. But it's the adults and the grandparents in particular in our communities who really keep our families together. And when they're dying at home, it takes about 5, 6, 7 years when you have emphysema and lung cancer, the destabilizing effect that has on our community. And so that this is a priority as much as the violence that we're dealing with. It's not something that we can wait on. And so that relevancy for our communities, it gives our communities something that they can understand and something that they can sink their teeth into in terms of changing the norms in our community. So it really elevates the issue of tobacco control, and it puts the tobacco industry on notice that our colored children count. Our colored children count. So what we bring to this effort is community outreach. Valerie, Dr. Yerger, and I went before the vote and went out and did some presentations, went to churches, went to community-based organizations, and really elevated the issue and spoke about it in a way that our folks could understand media advocacy, the relevant public testimony. And when we were there, it just happened that they were also talking about the e-cigarettes because there was a sweeping, they raised the tax, e-cigarettes, and so having professionals who can speak. So Dr. Gardner, they have like 2 minutes of public testimony, and he held court. So he was up there for 20 minutes answering questions and really saved the legislation so that it was able to go on. It made it out of committee and was able to go on to fight another day. So it's important to have the right people at the table to talk about the science and recognition and recognizing what Chicago's doing. So this is Fighting Fire with Fire. So this is an article that I wrote about just the whole package before the buffer zone was actually passed. And this was a press conference that we attended. So when this was rolled out, we were there and we presented Mayor Rahm Emanuel with an award, the Karen Bass Visionary Leader Award. And Karen Bass was the first African-American speaker for the State Assembly in California and is now a congresswoman. So this was a wonderful day. So we want to educate our communities about the pernicious targeting of our children. We can provide technical assistance to municipalities, and we want to create a blanket of flavored tobacco-free zones to protect our children. Currently in Berkeley, California, they're working on the buffer zone, and I have these gentlemen's pictures because it's 2 African-American men, and so in California that's a big deal, who introduced this legislation in Berkeley, which is a small city, to protect our African-American and Latino youth. So there's a ripple effect, so this is the beginning of that ripple. But we want to get to that, a positive tsunami. So we have a tsunami, we want to have a tsunami for good and just have this thing roll out all over the United States and have that effort come up to the top, and hopefully the FDA will ban it also.
Hey.
With the Chicago piece, so with the 351 tobacco retailers, is the legislation for new, or will all the existing ones?
Existing. So no grandfather, so the existing.
And what was the scene of the council hearing again? What kind of opposition did you have?
We had opposition from the convenience stores. They have an association, so which is one of the common arguments is that will affect business. So that was one of the arguments. What were some of the other arguments?
I think there was something that was fortuitous in Chicago. This is a great question. They combined the electronic cigarette and the menthol buffer zone into one bill. And after they were about ready to get rid of all of it, I was able to testify and slowed it down. The compromise, I leaned over and told these guys, the compromise is going to be, they say they're going to disaggregate these bills. They're going to separate the bills, and when they separated the bills, the menthol thing sailed through. It's 48 to 2. And we had to work another month. It wasn't until the middle of January that the e-cigarette legislation was sent through, but the menthol thing went right through. And the joke was, well, maybe we should put this on the ballot in other cities and let them get the controversy about the e-cigarettes so the menthol thing could slide through. There has been greater pushback since it's passed, because even though the convenience stores did have a representative to there, and even though the e-cigarette folks had a representative to there, the opposition that we've seen now is that they want to repeal the buffer zone. And I guess we are in a period, they have 6 months or something like that until June to actually do that. So we're still in the fight.
And they're still in the process of indexing all the products that have the flavors, which is a lot. So Chicago's doing the heavy lifting, and so as cities come behind them, then they'll be able to follow their roadmap. So, yeah. Yes.
I have a question, I guess a comment and a question. Dr. Gardner addressed it earlier this morning, and then you all have sort of reiterated in here about the predatory marketing of our communities, especially African Americans. And you also spoke about how many of the African American population leading all the ills, whether we're talking heart disease, lung cancer, even all the way down to violence, and we see it in all of our cities. And the problem that many of us fight here in our state, especially from the nonprofit area, being the boots on the ground, but also trying to sustain our efforts and looking to find other things to help sustain that. I find when we're looking for funding or whatever, a lot of the funders who, whether you're looking at victim service or whatever, some of those same funders, when you go all the way up and do research, they end up to be Altria and all those other things. Is there a comprehensive, or do you all know if there is a list of that's out there that's accessible to our communities of who?
Yes.
Who you can trust.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Is it available for our public? Because, you know, you do all this research and then at the end of the research, you find out, well, this was out there, this is gonna help your community in this area, but they're also funded by Altria and all these other places, then you have to actually do your research, really do your research.
Each of the tobacco industries have to publish their charitable contributions. The latest one I looked at was Altria's services in 2012. It's 18 pages long and has organizations. It's public. You can go through it. Each Reynolds has it, Lorillard has it, and you have to go through it. And they break it down by state. They break it down by community. They're giving stuff in Richmond, Virginia to this. They're doing the YMCA here, the Boys and Girls Club in New York, the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater here. And those are just the charitable contributions. Then there's the political contributions to the different state legislatures. And so there's multiple, yes, they're there, but it's the question I think that's really asked, they're not in one place. And it would be great if what we have in California is the Center for Community Organizing and Tobacco and Community Organizing, that's part of the American Lung Association. They put out a report every 6 months on the money going into the California legislature. That's just into the legislature. What's going on in Berkeley is another thing. What's going on nationally by Altria is another thing. It would be great if we had one group that had all that stuff one place, then you could kind of dial it up. Philip Morris has given the most money to one of the largest environmental groups, and I forget their name off the top. Say it again?
Keep America Beautiful.
Keep America Beautiful. And everybody thinks, oh, this is great, great, great. But they're the ones that are fighting hardest to stop butt legislation to keep butt litter off the street.
And what I've been doing this for so long and just looking over the years of silence. I used to say I felt like the Maytag repair man because it was lonely. So when you keep at it and you have good cheer, so, you know, you can disagree without being disagreeable and show up. Over time, it changes and people do start to get it. And so I've seen it with the California NAACP. And as people age and people are starting to die, the people who are making these decisions are starting to become more personally impacted by these issues that they hear you talking about for all these years. So that's one thing, but when you hit that silence, then that's usually, they're getting some money. And so when we fought for Prop 29, the new cigarette tax, and we lost by just a very small percentage. And we were trying to get our California black legislators to come out for it. And they just wouldn't say anything. They stalled you out because they know that even if they're not getting money that year, they'll get some money the next year. So we're playing checkers with nothing, and they're playing chess. And they can promise it, give it in a couple of years from the issue that you're actually working on. And I use different tactics. So I stay away. I don't fight education. When the tobacco industry, I don't fight that. I pick my fights. I was part of the National Association of Black Journalists, and they had sponsored one of the conferences in Texas. And so I actually had flyers. So during the dessert that was hosted by Altria or Philip Morris at the time, I had a little flyer because they were giving out free baby clothes in Africa. And I said, while you're having your dessert, this is what's going on with your brothers and sisters in Africa. So that was a rich group of people who could afford to have their own dessert at the Hyatt in Dallas or wherever we were. And I just quietly passed those out. So for them, I was angry about that because they didn't need that money. These are some of the most affluent African Americans in the country. They don't need to take money from Philip Morris. And I actually went to their board meeting and talked about it and just kind of shamed them. So I don't know what the effect was the next year, but it's different tactics. So organizations that really need it, who are really doing good things, I wouldn't use that same tactic. But when you hit the silence, then usually people are benefiting.
And you use a term, and you may not have said this word, but tobacco use, especially the targeting of our youth, it's a form of victimization, just like violences and so forth. And maybe we need to just stay focused on that because one question was asked by a child in the school if tobacco it's killing people and it's so dangerous, why don't they arrest people, you know? And that's not the mouth of a babe, you know, they're gonna ask that question. And I think hence, you know, we have those laws, whether, you know, Act 811 and so forth, but, you know, we gotta keep beating that same drum. But I think you utilizing that as victimization.
To make it relevant, right, to make it relevant to, right, what
There's
people, yes, sir.
What impact do you think subliminal suggestion would have on the marketing of menthol products to our community?
What do you mean by that?
I guess what I'm saying, subliminal suggestions and messages that we may not realize that have this, well, not impact, encouraging people to utilize menthol cigarettes.
Well, I
I
can't,
guess, let me just, in terms of an example, I think Walt Disney had a lawsuit against them some years ago because they had a beer commercial integrated into the film banner. And that's the subliminal suggestion. We don't see it with our naked eye, but our subconscious picks up in viewing something like that.
Right. We actually, as part of our APSI that we're going to be talking about tomorrow, we do media deconstruction of ads. So during the course of all these years I've been doing this, we actually have the ads up and show all the different things that are in the ads, because nothing in an ad is an accident. And most things are, they're very, you know, there are lots of sexual messages and ice cubes, there's all kinds of things. So we talk about that, but it's, you know, there's so much that you could talk about. But we do, in different courses in time for different projects that I've worked on, we have, and when talking with young people, just about advertising in general, and then what are the messages. So, you know, the sexuality, the Newport with they had usually, we had 3 people, a guy with 2 girls, different, you know, the different things are powerful. With Beyonce, the way her legs are open, because, you know, there's so many sexual things that they're hitting on that are making people, stimulating them to buy, so yes.
I don't have anything to add, just that, you know, the colors, the words, freshing, all of that ties into it. And Stan Glantz at the University of California at San Francisco is looking at smoking in the movies, because we started to see how, you know, not just somebody smoking, but you're seeing product placement. And how, you know, if your kids pick up on a lot of things that we as adults don't pick up on. So subliminal messaging is a huge issue, and it's something that the industry is very well, has a lot of expertise
They
in.
have a lot of expertise in, but I guess what, and just to, not to put too sharp a point on it, they've been pretty upfront with us. All these pictures that we see and all, you know, the black actors and the films and the placement in movies, it's been very straightforward. And what you're suggesting, and there's stuff going on subliminally that we may not pick up on. So it's unfortunate. That's what the cards we've been dealt. And that's the fight back that we have to take up. I know this lady's trying to get our attention here.
Yes, just one thing before you go. I just want to share with the 3 of you an Arkansas connection into TSAC, the tobacco,
Okay.
the advisory committee.
Right.
Dr. Claudia Barone, a professor over at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, has recently been elected to serve on the committee. Yes, and she couldn't be, I understand she couldn't be here today. She's on business travel or something, because I inquired if she was going to be here to meet you guys today. So I want you to know that, because I know you guys are close inside and stay on top of the committee's work.
We'll be in touch about that.
Yes. And then my question is about Brazil has banned menthol. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The use of, if I'm not mistaken, Brazil also banned the use of electronic cigarettes.
No, they have not. Let me just back up to the menthol thing. They banned it. Altria immediately took them to court. You can still buy menthol cigarettes in Brazil. It's being adjudicated as we speak.
Okay.
On terms of electronic cigarettes, this came up a little bit earlier. They have not outlawed them. There is some discussion about outlawing them. And then similar to what we've done here in different cities in the United States, different provinces and different cities in Brazil are taking up regulations around it, but Brazil as a country as a whole is not.
And when the banning process takes years, so the European Union, I think there's, for the menthols, 2020?
2020.
Yeah, so it's not like we banned it today, something would happen tomorrow, but it's a process. And we need to get on the road with the process.
Let's give representatives